The first cavalry horse collapsed before Eli Warren could even reach the broken gate. The animal struck the dirt hard, trembling beneath a saddle that had carried it through thousands of miles of frontier roads. Eli ran toward the chaos and saw a thin woman kneeling beside the fallen horse. Her hands steady even while rifles were being raised around her. Her name was Clara Bennett, a trained horse doctor, and she was the only person there trying to save the animals everyone else had already decided were worthless. The soldiers surrounding her did not see a healer. They saw the woman the army supplier had blamed for the sickness spreading through the cavalry remounts. They saw a convenient person to punish before anyone asked the harder question. Why were healthy government horses arriving sick? Clara grabbed Eli's sleeve as he reached her. "Please," she whispered, "if they take me now, they won't find what caused this." Behind the soldiers stood men wearing the clean coats and calm faces of people who believed money could bury any truth. They had already told the fort that Clara's treatments had failed. They had already prepared papers claiming she was responsible. And somewhere inside those papers was the lie that could destroy not only Clara's name, but every rancher who had trusted the Army's contracts. Eli had spent most of his life keeping his head down. He raised horses because animals were honest. They did not flatter a man with a title or a purse full of money. They either healed or they did not. But now an innocent woman was standing between a powerful supplier and the truth. When Clara saw the soldiers moving closer, she made a decision that sounded impossible. "Tell them I'm your wife." Eli stared at her. The request made no sense. They were strangers. They had never shared a home, a meal, or even a conversation longer than a few minutes. But Clara explained quickly. The fort gates were closed to anyone connected to the investigation unless they were family members of registered suppliers or officers. A married woman traveling with a rancher could enter the grounds without being separated and questioned before the Army inspector arrived. It was a desperate lie, and it was the only chance to expose a real one. For a moment, Eli looked at the sick horse, then at the woman who had risked everything to tell the truth. He knew what would happen if he helped her. His reputation would become tied to hers. If Clara was wrong, his ranch could lose every Army contract he had spent years building. But if she was right, innocent animals were being sacrificed for someone's profit. So Eli placed his hand on the wagon rail and said the words that would change both their lives. "She's my wife." The soldiers stepped aside, but the men behind them did not look surprised. That was what bothered Eli most. They looked afraid. Because whatever Clara Bennett had discovered was worth chasing her across the frontier. And whatever they were hiding was already killing the horses. Eli Warren had expected trouble when he spoke the lie. He had not expected the weight of it. By the time the wagon rolled through the fort entrance, every soldier who watched them pass knew the rancher from the northern valley had brought his wife into the middle of a military investigation. Eli kept his face calm, but his hands remained tight around the reins. Beside him, Clara Bennett sat quietly beneath the wagon cover, holding a small leather case against her chest. That case was the reason men wanted her silenced. Inside were her notes from the sick horses she had examined. Not guesses, not rumors. Measurements, symptoms, feed samples, and markings she had copied from the animals before anyone could move them. Clara had not come to accuse someone. She had come because the horses were dying. The first thing Eli noticed after they reached his ranch was that Clara did not ask for comfort. She asked for a bucket. "Water," she said, "and a clean cloth." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You just crossed a military checkpoint pretending to be my wife, and the first thing you're worried about is a horse." Clara looked toward the barn. "That horse can't defend itself." Eli did not have an answer for that. He brought the supplies. For the next hour, Clara worked through the ranch stable with the careful patience of someone who understood that fear made people careless. She checked the breathing of his strongest geldings. She examined their mouths, their coats, and the way they stood when no one was watching. She did not treat the animals like possessions. She treated them like witnesses. Eli had seen many horse handlers in his life. Men who shouted, men who forced, men who believed strength meant control. Clara was different. She listened. When she finally stepped away from the stall, her expression had changed. "What?" Eli asked. "The sickness is not spreading the way they said." He folded his arms. "They told the fort it was caused by a failed treatment. They lied." The answer came so quickly that Eli almost expected anger behind it. Instead, Clara sounded tired. She explained that the horses showed signs of a problem before her treatments began. More importantly, the sick animals had something in common. Their symptoms appeared after arriving through the Army supplier's route. Not every horse was affected, only the replacements. Eli looked toward the pasture where his own breeding stock grazed. That was the part he did not want to hear. "If this reaches your herd," Clara said, "you could lose everything." Eli had spent 15 years building that ranch. Every fence post, every stable beam, every horse came from his own hands. His father had left him land and debt. But Eli had turned the empty fields into something worth protecting. He knew what losing horses meant. He knew what losing trust meant too. Years earlier, he had believed a business agreement was stronger than a handshake. The man who sold him his first group of breeding mares had promised honesty, then disappeared when the animals arrived sick. Eli never forgot the lesson. Promises sounded different when money was involved. That was why Clara's words bothered him. Because he believed her. And he hated that he did. Near sunset, Clara opened her leather case and spread her papers across the kitchen table. There were drawings of horse brands, dates of delivery, notes about feed bags, names of suppliers. Eli studied them carefully. "You collected all this before they came after you?" Clara nodded. "I knew they would." "How?" She looked down at the papers. "Because when someone makes money from a mistake, they usually don't want the mistake corrected." Before Eli could answer, a sound came from outside. A horse. Then another. Not the slow approach of a neighbor. The deliberate arrival of men who wanted to be heard. Clara immediately gathered her papers. "They found me." Eli moved toward the window. 3 riders stopped at the edge of his property. The man in front wore a dark coat and carried himself like someone who had never been told no. He lifted a paper in his hand. "Mr. Warren," he called, "I'm here on official business." Eli did not open the door. The man smiled. "We need the woman you brought here." Clara stood behind Eli, silent. For the first time since he met her, Eli saw something other than determination in her face. Fear. Not fear for herself. Fear that the truth she carried might disappear before anyone had the courage to hear it. The man at Eli Warren's door introduced himself as Silas Vane, the regional supplier responsible for delivering cavalry horses and feed to several frontier forts. He spoke politely. That was what made him dangerous. "Mr. Warren," Vane said, holding the official paper where the evening light could reach it, "the Army has reason to believe the woman inside your home has interfered with government property." Eli looked at the document. The seal was real. The authority behind it was real. And for a moment, that was enough to make any ordinary man hesitate. Clara stepped closer. "That paper says I caused the sickness." Vane smiled. "Because that is what happened." Eli watched Clara's expression. She did not look like someone caught in a lie. She looked like someone hearing a familiar accusation. "How many horses arrived sick?" Clara asked. Vane's smile faded slightly. "That is not your concern. It is if you are responsible for replacing them." The silence after those words told Eli more than any confession could have. Vane had expected fear. He had not expected a question. Eli opened the door just enough to stand in the gap. "You're on my land." Vane glanced past him. "With a woman who was wanted for questioning." "Questioning ain't the same as guilty." The supplier looked at Eli carefully. You should think about what you are risking. I already did. Eli stepped outside, and I decided. That was the moment the lie about Clara being his wife became something else. A promise. Because Vane understood something Eli had not considered. A man could abandon a stranger. But a man who publicly claimed responsibility had placed his own name beside hers. And names mattered on the frontier. Vane lowered the paper. Tomorrow morning, the army inspector arrives. When he does, he will learn that Clara Bennett escaped custody and that you helped her. Eli did not move. Then I reckon he'll hear the whole story. Vane's expression hardened. Stories don't beat documents, Mr. Warren. After the riders left, Eli closed the door and placed the official notice on the table. Clara stared at it. I'm sorry. Eli looked at her. For what? For bringing this to your door. He picked up her notes. No, someone brought this to my door long before you did. She looked confused. Eli pointed to the papers. Those horses came through my valley. They drank from my wells. They were sold by men who promised they were healthy. He paused. If someone is poisoning the truth, I want to know why. That night, they began comparing everything Clara had collected with Eli's own records. Feed deliveries, horse brands, purchase dates. The more they matched, the clearer the pattern became. The sick horses were not random. They all carried replacement brands from the same supplier route. Healthy animals were being purchased by the army. Somewhere between the ranches and the forts, those horses were disappearing. And sick animals were taking their place. The next morning, Eli and Clara rode toward the fort holding the records they had gathered. They needed proof from the source. Not suspicion. Not accusations. Proof. At the army stable, Clara examined the remaining horses while Eli searched through delivery records. The clerk behind the counter refused to cooperate at first. Those books belonged to the army. Clara placed one page in front of him, then explained why the delivery numbers changed. The clerk looked down. A horse identification number had been altered. Only one mark. Small enough that most people would never notice. Large enough to replace an expensive animal with a cheaper one. The clerk swallowed. I can't discuss this. Eli leaned closer. Can't. The man looked toward the doorway. That was when Eli understood. The supplier did not control only the horses. He controlled the people who recorded them. Later that afternoon, Clara found the feed storage area. The bags appeared normal, but she cut open one and examined the grain. Her face changed. This is it. Eli stepped beside her. What is? The sickness. She held a handful of grain. The feed is contaminated. The discovery should have brought relief. Instead, it brought fear. Because now they knew the cause. And the person who caused it knew they knew. Before they could leave, a messenger arrived from the fort. The army inspector had changed his schedule. He would arrive at dawn. And Silas Vane had already requested that Clara Bennett be arrested before the inspection began. The evidence they needed was finally in their hands. But they had one night to keep it alive. The night before the army inspector arrived, Eli Warren learned something every rancher feared. The barn doors had been forced open. By the time he reached the stable, smoke was already rising from the corner where Clara's feed samples and records were stored. Someone had come to destroy the evidence. Eli ran inside without thinking. The heat pushed against him as he pulled the burning crates away from the wall. The papers inside were the only proof that the sickness had a source, and without them, Silas Vane could turn the entire accusation back onto Clara. Then Eli heard a voice behind him. Mr. Warren. Silas Vane stood outside the barn. Calm. Dry. Untouched. You should have left this alone. Eli carried the damaged box out into the cold air. You poisoned horses. Vane shook his head. No, I sold what I was contracted to sell. The horses were switched. Can you prove it? That question stayed with Eli, because Vane knew exactly where the battle was. Not with guns, not with anger, with proof. Before sunrise, the ranch was surrounded by riders from the fort. The army inspector had arrived early, and Vane had already prepared his story. Clara Bennett had interfered with military animals. Clara Bennett had made accusations without permission. Clara Bennett had caused panic. The official papers were arranged neatly. The truth was scattered across a burned barn floor. For the first time since Eli met her, Clara looked uncertain. I should go, she said quietly. Eli turned. Why? Because if they arrest me, they stop looking at you. He looked at the woman who had spent days fighting for horses that could not speak. No. Eli. No. He picked up the damage box. You came here because you were trying to save something that couldn't save itself. He looked toward the approaching soldiers. Now I'm doing the same. The army inspector, Colonel Andrew Mercer, listened to both sides. He was not cruel, but he was cautious. That made him harder to convince. Silas Vane presented the official records first. The numbers matched. The seals were correct. The signatures appeared proper. Then Clara presented what remained of her evidence. Feed samples, horse markings, delivery notes. The inspector studied everything, but it was not enough. The altered records had been repaired. The damaged samples were questioned, and the supplier's paperwork looked cleaner than the truth. For one terrible moment, it seemed Vane had won. Then Clara asked one question. Colonel, may I examine the horses delivered in the last 3 months? Mercer frowned. Why? Because paper can be changed. She looked at the stable. But brands cannot lie as easily. They walked through the horses one by one. Clara checked the markings, the age of the animals, the condition of their teeth, the scars from old injuries. She was not looking for sickness. She was looking for identity. Finally, she stopped beside a cavalry horse near the back of the stable. This horse was listed as a 5-year-old breeding quality replacement. Mercer looked at the record. Yes. Clara placed her hand on the horse's shoulder. It is not. The room went quiet. She pointed to an old scar beneath the mane. This mark was recorded 3 years ago on a horse sold for half the army price. The number was changed after delivery. The inspector looked at the record again. The lie was no longer hidden. It was written there. One small alteration. One missing entry. One animal that had a history someone hoped nobody would check. But Silas Vane did not surrender. That proves nothing, he said. Everyone turned. He stepped forward. She is a horse doctor. She wants to believe she found something. Then he looked at the inspector. And Mr. Warren has already admitted he sheltered her. It was a clever attack. The evidence was real. But so was the question of trust. Mercer looked at Eli. Did you know she was wanted when you helped her? Eli answered honestly. Yes. The room shifted. Vane smiled. Finally. A mistake. But Eli continued. I knew she was being chased. He looked at Clara. I didn't know if she was right. A pause. Then I watched her work. His voice stayed calm. And I watched the people who wanted her silent. The inspector said nothing. Eli stepped closer. I've raised horses my whole life. When an animal is sick, you don't blame the first person who touches it. You find what caused it. That was when the fort clerk stepped forward. The same clerk who had refused to speak days earlier. Everyone looked at him. Vane did too. and the fear returned to the man's face. "I can't." His voice stopped. Vane stared at him. A quiet warning without a word. The clerk lowered his eyes. For years, he had watched numbers change. He had watched healthy horses disappear from records. He had watched people stay silent because silence was safer. Then he looked at Clara, the woman who had risked everything for the truth. "I saw him change the delivery numbers." The room froze. Vane's face changed for the first time. Not anger. Fear. The clerk continued. "The original records are in the old storage room. I kept copies because I knew someday someone would ask. Mercer sent soldiers to retrieve them. Minutes later, the missing pages arrived. The original horse numbers. The real purchase prices. The evidence that healthy animals had been removed and replaced with cheaper, sick horses. Silas Vane's own records defeated him. The same documents he trusted to protect him revealed everything. The investigation continued for weeks. Witnesses came forward. Suppliers admitted what they knew. The army reviewed every delivery connected to Vane's route. But the final hearing was held before a military board because the fraud had damaged not only ranchers, but the army itself. The hearing room was small. Wooden benches. Oil lamps. Stacks of handwritten records. Silas Vane entered believing his reputation would protect him. For years, people had listened when he spoke. They had accepted his papers, his titles, his confidence. But confidence could not erase a changed brand. It could not erase a false number. And it could not erase the memory of horses that had suffered because someone wanted more money. The board reviewed the evidence slowly. Not dramatically. Not quickly. Because justice was never supposed to move as fast as a lie. When the decision came, Silas Vane was removed from his position and ordered to answer for the fraud committed through his supply contracts. The room remained silent. Then Clara finally released a breath she had been holding since the day she hid beneath Eli's wagon cover. She had not won because someone believed her. She had won because the truth survived long enough to be examined. Outside the hearing room, Eli stood beside her. The first time he called her his wife had been a lie. But now they both understood something. Some promises begin with pretending, and some become real because two people choose to stand by them. Months after Silas Vane lost his position, the horses at Eli Warren's ranch began to look different. Not because they were stronger, not because they were faster, because they were no longer afraid. Clara Bennett noticed that first. She noticed the way a nervous horse stopped pulling away when she approached. She noticed the way old scars healed when animals were finally given proper care. She noticed because she had spent most of her life proving that patience could save what force could not. The ranch had changed too. The small room where Eli once kept broken tools and old supplies became a place where ranchers brought injured animals for treatment. Men who once doubted Clara's methods now waited quietly for her opinion. Not because she demanded respect, because she earned it. But healing did not erase everything. Some wounds stayed longer than others. For Clara, it was the sound of approaching riders. Even after the investigation ended, even after the army confirmed her work, the sound of horses stopping outside the ranch house could still make her hands freeze. She had spent so long expecting someone to arrive with accusations that peace felt unfamiliar. One evening, when a delivery wagon stopped at the gate, Clara stepped away from the window. Eli noticed. "You all right?" She looked toward the road. Then she nodded. "I'm learning." "Learning what?" "That not every rider comes to take something away." Eli understood. Because he had his own fear. For years, he believed protecting his ranch meant never needing anyone. He thought depending on another person was the same as giving them the power to hurt him. But Clara had shown him something different. Trust was not built by pretending there was no risk. It was built by seeing the risk and choosing kindness anyway. The wagon that had carried her into his life remained behind the barn. The same wagon where she had hidden from the men chasing her. Eli never repaired the damaged cover. When Clara asked why, he simply said, "Some things don't need fixing." She smiled. "That wagon saved my life." Eli looked at it. "No." He shook his head. "You saved the truth." Years passed. The Army changed its inspection process. Ranchers received fair contracts. And the old route that had carried dishonest shipments became known for something different. Reliable horses. Honest records. People began bringing their animals to Clara not because she was the woman who had once been accused. They brought them because she was the woman who had stood when others stayed silent. Eli and Clara never forgot the strange beginning of their story. A desperate request. A borrowed name. A marriage that started as protection. But the strongest things on the frontier were not always built the way people expected. Some homes began with a foundation. Some began with a promise. And some began when one person opened a wagon door and decided another person was worth protecting. Years later, visitors to the Warren Ranch would still see that old wagon near the barn. Children were never part of the story they told there. The story belonged to the adults who had survived it. To the rancher who risked his name. To the horse doctor who risked her future. To the clerk who finally chose honesty over fear. And to every person who learned that truth sometimes arrives looking like trouble. The last thing Clara ever changed at the ranch was not a medical record or a treatment method. It was a small sign above the stable door. It read, "Care first, judgment later," because she knew what it felt like to be blamed before being heard. And Eli knew what it meant to open a door before knowing who would walk through it. The lie that began their journey was forgotten. The choice they made afterward was not. If this story reminded you that one act of courage can protect more than one life, share where you are watching from and write "Truth Survives" in the comments. Because sometimes the greatest rescue on the frontier was not saving a horse. It was saving a person's chance to be believed.